All righty. Good morning, everyone. This is Matt Sexton with the Florida Department of Transportation's CAD office. I suppose you probably already knew that part, though. Today we have the curb ramp modeling and ADA ramps training. This will be led by Todd Holt, and I'll go ahead and turn things over to Todd.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. Good morning and welcome, everybody. This is going to be our training, or more or less kind of a discussion on curb ramps, seeing what we have for within FDOT. We'll review the FDOT. I was looking to see if we had presentations on it. There's different presentations of how to model, but we can kind of run through picking one out and seeing how we would model it as well. I think in the FDOT workspace right now, all there is is the 2D ramps that we have. And there's a lot to go into those, modeling it, but curb ramps and modeling in the civil cells, think of it as just geometry. And how do we want to rule that geometry together? To be able to place in our model, in our design, and then make those modifications. That's really all we're building into that civil cell. And I was just looking at here at some of the different standards that FDOT has, and we can jump into the different standards on here. And kind of going off of that, I can show different examples that I've done for different agencies maybe, and then we'll come in, and I think the one that I want to build is this curb ramp A or curb ramp B. We can run through and kind of build that. But when you're thinking about civil cells and the placement of that, is we're going to build everything off of reference or reference elements. So we need reference elements to go in and place that geometry. And that's really just to get it into our design file. Once it's in that design file, we can make modifications to it based off the rules and geometry that we have in there. That we can place. So if we just kind of look at this curb ramp here, and let me see if I have, this is kind of a normal curb ramp. We have deductible warning. We may have the slopes that we need to come into our transition areas. That's really what we need to do, is dissect that geometry, because this would be easy to model it just by hand. But if we have that certain standard that we're following, if we look at the CRA or CRB, there's not much that varies between these, besides for the sidewalk back and the landing. So maybe I want to come in and have this ruled and build in these modifications to that civil cell. So I can place it maybe curb ramp A, and then configure it for a curb ramp B, or I have a curb ramp B, maybe transition it to the A, based off the references and the rules that we have in there. So I think that's what I'm going to do, but here is, so let's go ahead and let's look what we have. And this is just another that I was just working on before for another DOT. Right, so we have a driveway that we're going to come in, and then I built in another civil cell that's going to be placed off that for a curb ramp. So this is kind of a skewed curb ramp that we have placed in there and modeled out. There's still a couple things that I need to details I need to model out, but this would be kind of the end goal, is to get our not only the 2D elements that we have in here, but then also the 3D element. And this civil cell for the curb ramp that I have here, if I come in and hide, that's a skewed curb ramp. So we have our 2D geometry that we have here. We also have surface templates and linear templates that are making up that 3D element. So that's really kind of the end goal, is to model that out. And then we can build into the civil cell what that slope is, or have that project down. That needs to be a 12:1 slope down to our line and then transition from there to 2% and transition in there. So we have different requirements that we need to do to build out those different ADA ramps for the different ones. So we can model that out in there. So let's go ahead. I'm going to close this file. And let's see if we're able to. Get that file up and share that with in the chat. So we do have just our standard training, creating curb ramp civil cell.zip, and I'm going to send that over to you. Within there, this is kind of what we're going to be running through, but we'll run through this within the FDOT workspace. So this is a good starter to kind of build that information out. I'll give you a step-by-step training guide as well. So I'm going to throw this zip in there. That's kind of what we're going to be running through. I'll probably ad-lib a little bit from that just to have some of my recommendations in the civil cells that we build. Let me see if I can throw that in. Chat there. I can't remember, Chris, or the FDOT team. Can we put stuff in the chat to share? Or did we have to share that through a Teams link or share file?
You can try dropping it in there. If it doesn't work, just send it to me and I'll get it to everybody.
Okay. Yeah, it's not allowing me. Can you send me that link again? So let's do this. And while this is getting ready, is there any specific questions that you have on curb ramps or the standards? And this can be pretty informal. We can kind of walk through things and see what's working, what's not working in there. But I'm gonna go ahead and launch the workspace. We're gonna be in 2024. Of the workspace, and let's just first review what we have for civil cells, and then we'll walk through a process of creating that civil cells show some of the tools. We're not get through everything, but at least we'll have something in there. So when I start doing civil cells, I'm just going to come in here and we're going to use the blank file.dgen. I'm going to open that one up, and we're just going to create some geometry to place that. Or kind of run through the process of building a civil cell. That's loading up. I've got the links. And we will have a couple of different presentations on kind of what we're going to go over to at Plug. There is a workshop building civil cells. There's a best practice for civil cells, which I can look at that presentation that we have. I'll share some of those. And then there's a modeling ADA ramp presentation that we also have. So go ahead and upload that so you guys have that one. So here I'm in the FDOT. I'm just going to create a new file. And I guess for purposes, we'll just create this as a DSGN. So we'll modify the name on this one. Simple cells. That in color. So we'll just use our the training data set that we have. I'm going to create and open up that file. So whenever I build civil cells, right, think about it's really getting into there and just looking at the standard and figuring out from that standard what we want to use for reference lines to place that in there. And probably for this one, I would probably create for the reference line. Let's see if we can. I think it's going to allow me to do this. And right, depending on what we have, if the gutter line or the curb is built into this, right, or if it's just going to be from the sidewalk back. So if we want to place this, so maybe we have curb built into there. So maybe it's the edge of pavement is going to be a reference, our flow line in the back top of curb to build that. So we may have 3 references. We might just need the curb, the flow line, maybe it's the curb back. But that's one thing that we want to figure out is how do we want to place that? How do you guys do that now, right? In that geometry that we place those off of. So if we're building something like this, maybe we have, you know, just drawing in reference lines of kind of thinking this. And this is kind of the process that I go through of having that is how do I want that to place? What geometry do I want to use from my model or have the user add that geometry in? So maybe I want to have these as reference lines. I need to have control. Is my sidewalk going to be a reference line too? Do I need to set this front sidewalk, minimum sidewalk? So maybe we have this situation where we have at utility strip. I want to build that in, so maybe I need another reference for my sidewalk front and sidewalk back. And then one last reference that I would probably put in here is maybe it's the center line of the ramp that I want to use to build that. Off of those references, that's where I'm going to build in the different controls for the actual geometry of this curb ramp. So if I switch my color here, maybe we have that cyan color. Right. So what controls would we need? I like to kind of build into my civil cells little handles that are easy to see. They're on construction level that you can turn off and on. So maybe off of the edge of pavement line, or maybe it's that curb back top. Thinking about what's controlling that civil cell is I might build a handle that I can use from center line. So I'm going to rule that. So maybe I build a control line in here, and that's pretty hard to see. So let's do green. Maybe there's that green line. I'm going to change this to green. That's going to be control line. And then off of that, I'm going to build another control off of there and build another control that I have in there. So just kind of running through and thinking about the different references that we have. So we have controls that would control our 4-foot minimum for the ramp. So we can grab those handles to make those adjustments, and from there we can go to 7 foot from either side. So when building the civil cell, right, think about the references, think about how you're going to make those modifications once it's in place within that civil cell. Right, and this is usually what I kind of do is when I'm building these for different agencies, I'll run through their standard plans and kind of build that. But right now, if you don't have the civil cell in 2D or 3D, are you modeling this all by hand for curb ramps? Are you not worrying about the 3D? How's that getting done right now? Are you not modeling your curb ramps at all?
Yeah, Kevin Lopez from District 6 here. Yeah, we haven't been modeling the curb ramps. We just leave those areas as a wholes essentially, and quantify them in the 2D.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's see if we can get that to change, and let's get just a crash course on building one. And
I guess a question I have, or one thing I know we're looking at CRAs and CRBs. One thing that I'd like to see, I guess, is modeling it at a corner intersection, right through a curb return, where it'll be following an arc, right, the reference point, instead of a line. I think that's where we run into issues a lot in modeling it.
okay. So like this curb F or CRF or one of these types.
Right. I mean, the CRA is fine. It's just, I guess, the application on a intersection corner where I know you're setting up your reference points. I guess it's just where it would be an arc, those reference points instead of a line.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna throw the training that I did, the curb ramp, right? That is just doing like these, right? That's just gonna
Okay.
do
Right.
like this. So let's do that. Let's go ad hoc. Let's go off the wall. Let's get crazy, and let's build a different one. And then I'll have, so if we build something like this, curb ramp wall, the tools are going to be the same. It's just the references off there. So we'll just kind of run through maybe this curb ramp here. So we'll move this over. But I would recommend just running through that other one. So here I'm just in a regular file. The first thing that I can do in a civil cell is, right, we don't want to build that off of the main line. We want to be able to place it. So I wouldn't build the civil cell geometry right on my corridor or on that curb return or ramp that we have in there. I would probably build it off to the side. So let's see if I have the file. So let's just do this. So when I build civil cell, I'm just trying to think the best way to run this in there. So a couple of things that I'm going to set up is I'm going to go back to my settings and my button assignments. Change my tentative. I don't like the snake fangs or left button, right chord button. So I'm going to do a fifth button on my mouse. And then I'm going to sort of reset that so it's easier to snap when I need to snap. And then preferences, I am going to come in and change my preferences. This is something that I usually do when I come in to set these up, is those manipulator settings, so it's easier to grab those. So I'm going to set that to 20. My normal color, set that to yellow. Read only, I'm going to set that to red. set that to blue and set that to green. And then the font scale, I'm going to set that 1.5. I just do this so it's easier to see that because my eyes are bad, getting old. So that's one of the first things that I kind of do is come reset that, save settings. I also like down in the lower right-hand corner is next to where the level is. I'm going to right-click on here. I'm going to show my running coordinates because that will give me my X and Y. One best practice or one rule is to not build civil cells in negative coordinates. That's an older rule. I've always just followed it. I don't know if it really matters anymore. But one thing is, when you're building civil cells, is you don't want that in a negative coordinates. So now that we have this kind of set up, I'm going to come in and I want to build just a temporary terrain model in here. So I'm going to go to my geometry. I'm going to do lines between points. Just going to pick a linear, and we'll do regular design. We'll just do a construction class line. Let's just do that. And this is allowing us, just to build something if we have end conditions built in the civil cell, if we're going to build a curb return in there, just to allow us to kind of target that. I'm just going to build that out real quick so we have something to target if we need to. I don't think we will, but just we'll get the trust in the process here. So I'm not going to be too worried about where I have that out. I'm just going to make this 100, or I can make it 1,000. And then from there, I'm going to do a single offset entire element. Maybe we want this to be 100 as well. So I'm just going to get some geometry in here to help build a terrain model if we need a target. I'm just going to do single offset entire element. Build that out. And there. I didn't match my feature definition. Set. And then from here, I'm just going to come in and build my line. So there, I'm just going to build a shape. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I want to build or give those constant elevations. So I'm going to come in here. Let's just say we're going to build this up at 100. So I'm going to use this geometry, these construction lines to build a terrain model that I can use to target. So there I have my terrain model there. And then from there, I'm going to come in and grab or build a terrain model from elements. I want this to be a boundary element, set my feature definition, existing, and I'll just give this a target. So DTM existing target that we're going to build out. And then I'm going to come in and grab my construction elements. And then right, so I'm just building that terrain model that I can use, and then I can set that as active. So here, let me turn off my construction. I'm going to set this, and this is just kind of setting up the file. And then I'm going to set that as active, right? And then I'm going to turn off that 3D, just like we do in the regular files. I don't want to grab the 3D elements, so I'm going to turn that off. I still have that shape in there. I could come back and turn on the constructions. So I'm going to build everything in there. And then from this point, I'm going to hit my right mouse button, go to view controls. I'm just going to open up to view plan in 3D. We'll see where we're going to put that in there. So now that we have that, we're going to come in and kind of build out our curve return, or build out that, that sleeve in there. And on this one, we're going to go to geometry. And as reference lines, I want to be able to draw something in there. I don't think we have anything on civil cell. So I'm going to use this construction lines. So we already used the blue dash lines in there. So we'll do the green dash for our reference line. What I usually do is, instead of a straight line, anytime I build civil cells, I'll try and build it on a curve. So if we come in here and we're going to do arc between points, so I'm going to build it on an arc. I'm going to build that in my arc between points. And I'm going to do center radius. Set my radius to, let's say, 20. And then my sweep angle, I'm going to have that be 90. And maybe this is my construction line. I kind of give a name. You don't have to name it right now, but I always find it easier when you go and try to select that. So maybe this is my ref of curve flow line. Right, and I'm just going to place that somewhere in here in my positive coordinates at the very top of that. And I want to draw it in something like that, and I'm going to have that 90 in. And I'm going to place that. So there's my first curve. On other ones, I might do another tool that I use quite a bit too, is the center end or start end and pass through. And then I'll define a radius of like 8,500 or 7,500. Because if I know it's going to place on a radius or a curve, I know it's going to place on a tangent. Right, when I build that in there. That's kind of my thinking when I build that geometry out. All right, so this is going to be our flow line. And then we put in there. So from this flow line, we might want to go 6 inches back as the curve back top. So what I would probably do now is I'm going to come in and do a single offset entire element. And I'm going to do, maybe it's a 6 inch back. I'm going to define what that is using that same, and we can name it our curve back top as our reference. All right, so I have my flow line, I have my curve back line. On our references, though, we don't want anything ruled to each other. So we want to break those rules. So I'm going to come up to my common tools, and I'm going to simplify that geometry of that second line. I don't want it ruled off that first one, because I want to use these as references. All right, so I'm just going to click on that, and that's going to remove the referencing rule from the original on that reference that we have in there. All right, so there we have our curve return. We have our curve flow line. We have our curve back top. If we're coming in and skewed, so maybe from this line just to draw in, so I'm going to do a line between points. And just to establish, that front sidewalk, maybe I snap to this one. I can also come and turn off on my feature definition toolbar the persistent snaps. This is what's giving the rules, is that persistent snaps. That's what's going to develop the rules between it. If this is off, I can still snap to the element, but it's not going to have the rule associated to that element. So I can still snap to it. So if I want to establish maybe from this curve back top, if we go 5 feet in a distance at 90, I just want to establish that where that distance is or that buffer zone, right, for our sidewalk. In. I'm going to place that line in here. If I click on that rule or this line now, with that persist snap off, it's not creating that little glyph or the rule in there. If I turn that on and come back and snap, and then look at this line, that's going to have the little rule. The rule is what this persist snaps in. That's what we want to build into when we build a simple cell. But if we're placing references, we don't want that on. But if you turn it off, remember to turn that back on in that reference. Right? I don't need this line, so I'm going to delete it. We have this line here that we're going to place in. I'm going to turn my persist snap off. And we're going to establish maybe our sidewalk. So there's our sidewalk front. And then maybe off of that, we want a single offset entire element. And what's your sidewalk width? Is it 5 feet, 6 feet? To start off with.
Do 6 feet.
So we'll set that to 6. Right. I have that in there. I have it overlapping on there. So this one line we don't need, so I'm going to delete that. That's going to remove the rule off of this one. On this line, I want these to be independent of each other. So I want this as a reference and this as a reference. So I'm going to come back up to my common tool and simplify that geometry on that one. So now if I select on my sidewalk, they're all independent of each other. So this is just the geometry that we can use from the model or that we put in to place the civil cell. We don't want any of those to be ruled off of each other. Right, so we're just establishing that information on there. Off of these is where we're going to build the geometry for that civil cell. So that's where the intent and the design is going to come from. All right, so if we kind of build, we're just going to look at this option B. There we have a utility strip, that's 2 foot. There we have a 6 foot. We have our slopes based off of that. And the edge of pavement. And if anywhere along you guys have questions, feel free to ask. This is, again, pretty informal that we're kind of running through. So the next thing that I would probably do now is I want to establish my vertical or my profiles on my references. Right? If I look at my terrain, I know that that's at 100. So what I usually like to do is I'm going to set my profile and I'm going to do constant elevation, profile by constant. And maybe my flow line is at, just say 105.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, I just.
Right. So I want to profile my reference elements. I'm going to grab my curve flow line. I'm going to set that to 105. Like that, reset. That's going to start building out that reference. And then from flow line to the curve back top, maybe that's a 6-inch difference, or 8 inches from flow line. Maybe it's from the edge of pavement that I need in there as well to that curve back top. But we're just going to say from flow line that this is 6 inches above to that curve back top. So I'm going to set that as a constant elevation as well. So I'm going to go 105.5. And I'm going to set that to my back curb, the top there. Locate the element, right click, reset. I'm going to apply that. So there we have the two reference elements, and they have profiles. So I'm doing that because when we pick those, we're going to inherit the profile from the elements that we put in. So this is going to allow us to build that 3D geometry that we have in to those civil cells. And maybe this curved back top or the sidewalk front is a 2% slope from that sidewalk, and the front back sidewalk is 2% on. So we can do a project profile by slope from element, vertical offset of 0. We can also do the slope. We want that to be 2%. Okay. So I'm going to select on this element. I want that to project at 2% from my curved back top. So I can establish that line on there. So I'm just building that geometry into, horizontal and vertical. And that's really all we're doing when we're building this civil cell in there. And then this back of sidewalk, I'm going to grab that. That's going to be ruled off of the front of the sidewalk at a 2%. So there we have our reference elements. And then we also have our sidewalk elements that we have. They're 2D and they're profiled. All right, so from here, now maybe we want to start drawing in the main foundation of our civil cells. So there, I'm going to turn back on my persist snap, because now I want to start building my rules to the geometry that we're going to base off of. And so we'll kind of do this curve in CRF, and we got a curve back. It's going to tie there. We got a radius and a 2 foot. We got a little bit thicker strip. We got our sidewalk that's going down to 6. We got 1 to 12. So one of the first controls that I would probably build into this is, how do I want to control this after I place it? Right. So the front sidewalk and the curb back top, I want to establish where that line is. So at this intersection point here, I want to build in a little control handle to help me control that. And then I can build into that what I need for my other references. So I'm going to do this construction line blue because I want to be able to turn this stuff off as I build in that reference. So I'm going to do my line. I'm going to do line from element by angle from element. And this is going to be just a little handle that I'm going to use to kind of build everything else on. So I'm going to set this to 90. My start distance and end distance, I'm going to put this as 1 and 1. And this will be a, say, control handle. So with this tool, I want to make a bi-angle off of my front sidewall. And then I'm going to locate my start point. And I'm going to grab my snaps and right click on my snaps. I'm going to show all my snaps here. And I'm going to use my intersection point snap. Snap to the intersection of my curved back top and my sidewalk front line. That blue is hard to see. Can you guys see that blue all right there? Or is that still kind of hard to see? I can change that to red. Or actually, let's go yellow. That might be easier to see. So I'm going to change that feature definition. Right, so from this line, or this is a control, it's always going to be at that intersection. So when I come in and start building that, I'm going to use this to help me control and make modifications to that civil cell. So if we go back to our detail, so from this point back, yeah, that's where we would need a distance. That, but we're not getting that on there. Joel or I think Kevin, what is that a 6-foot transition or ramp?
So we usually use 7 feet as a standard. It can be reduced to 6, but we usually use 7 if we can fit it.
Okay, so let's put 7 in there. And the nice thing about this is we're going to have that as that'll be variable. All right, so from here, so from that point or that intersection point, what I could do, I already have that established here. So I could do a single offset entire element. And if I set this to 7 feet, right, what that allowed me to do, so I'm just building in the control into that, and then I'm going to do a single offset partial from the sidewalk line to draw in my sidewalk that I have in there. So if I look at the rules, I can make that adjustment as maybe it's a 7-foot default off of that line. I have that rule, and then if I do another sidewalk line, so here I'm going to come in and go to our sidewalk. And this is going to be our sidewalk front. I'm going to come in and do a single offset partial. And what I usually like to do is set the offset, but I'm not going to set that offset, so I want it to be on this line. I do want to use my intersection snap. I want to make sure that persistent snaps is on, and I'm going to select on this line. And I want to pay attention to the arrow of how this line is drawn. Right, so this is running from our left-hand side to right-hand side. So to start, I'm going to snap to this intersection of that control line and our reference line. And then I'm also going to snap for the end, I'm going to snap to our control line and our curve back top line. And I'm going to make sure I get that snap to stick. I don't want to mirror it. Right, so if I now come in and select on there, I have those glyphs, I see those rules. So this line is based off of this. So if I come here, let's say, make it 5 feet, that's going to control that line in there. So we can set that to default, and that's the beauty of the civil cells, is we can come in and make those adjustments after we place that. Right. One other thing when you're making civil cells is you want, as you build in that geometry, you want to make sure that the rules are holding. So I always come up to the model detailing tab as well. We'll kind of run through this as tests. I know we have one line in there. We're going to create civil cell. We don't have to worry about the name right now, so I'm just going to do a left click through that. I'm going to start locating my references. So my flow line, my curve back top, and we should see these elements start highlighting as we select a reference. When we do that, we know that that geometry is going to hold and be intact as we build that civil cell. So just as a quick test, we come in and select the references, make sure everything is highlighting as we build that reference in there. And then I'm going to hit escape because I don't want to build that civil cell. But that's just our quick test to make sure that we have that geometry building into that certain civil cell. So there we have our ramp line. We're going to do the same thing on this, but we want to rule it to this side. So we're going to do our single offset partial. This is going to be maybe our sidewalk back line. We're going to do a single offset partial off of this line. I'm going to set this to 0. I want it to be in that line, but I want to snap to my intersection. So intersection of my control line in that. And then I want to snap to this intersection up here. Right, so they're establishing a 0 offset off this line. This is, so the sidewalk back is ruled off of this line. Everything's going to be controlled off of this line. So if I move this back to, let's say, 10 feet, that geometry is going to go with it that we build it. All right, so we're just building the rules of that geometry that we have in this particular, these two lines. Right, so now we need to do our back line, and we're going to snap to our front sidewalk and our back sidewalk. We're just going to do a line between points. I'm going to do the intersection snap. That holds up the best, so your intersection snap, your key point snap are some of the better tools to hold up in there, the snaps to build those rules. I'm going to do my intersection snap. I'm going to snap to my line here, and I'm going to have that snap. See how that kind of went down there, so I want to establish my different intersection snap. There might be times that we want to switch that to a key point snap. I'm going to do that instead. Let me reset. I'm going to switch to my key point snap and line between points. I'm going to do my snap to my two end lines and draw that. Right. Again, we're just building that rule. So if we make this change on our handle, everything's going to roll off there. We're building the rules off our reference elements that we have. Let's see. After siding. So not knowing we want to be here. And we're going to have a 30. So that's to the back. That's been transitioned out. Pull down to there. That's going to be. here, I would probably come in and build a curb. That might be a curb back line. So this is going to be a single offset partial, 0 on this line. So I just want this to run from and this is kind of part of the process of just building the rules in there. So I'm trying to build my construction line that I have off of here. I know I want it as a curb back line. Maybe I want to, I don't know if I want to tie it to this. I'm going to build it to that intersection, and I'm going to snap it to that intersection. And then I'm going to do another line for curb from this intersection to that intersection. And then my last from here, and maybe I want to add that out. So we really don't know how that's going to transition in there, but I can establish those, and then I'm going to project the profile onto these. So I'm going to run a linear template along this element, and then I'm going to build my a surface template off of these elements that I have here, and use some of these as break lines. So I just have building out the 2D geometry right now that I have, and then I'm going to build the vertical to get my surface templates and linear templates off it. So got that line. So on these now, let's so let's start profiling these elements. Okay, but before we do that, let's test this civil cell one more time. So we want to come back and test to make sure our rules are holding. I'm going to do a quick test. So model detailing, our create civil cell. Not going to worry about the name, so civil cell name. I'll locate my references, so our flow line, our curve back top, our sidewalk front, and sidewalk back. So everything is holding up and grabbing and highlighting. So our rules are intact. We have our quick test. We know that this geometry, at least the 2D, is going to hold up as we're building this geometry out. Right. So what I want to do now is I want to build on my curve back. I'm going to use this to run my linear template about, but I'm going to build out my profiles on these lines. So I'm going to select that line and open up profile view, or let's go our hard right click. We're going to go view controls. We're going to go 3 views, plan, profile, and 3D. I'm going to click OK, and here I'm going to select on my curve back line and stuff my open view. So right now we're just seeing our existing ground that we established. So what I want to do now is I want to build the profiles onto that line. So I'm going to project my curb flow line and my curb back the top at a 0% slope to that. So I'm going to go to geometry, my vertical tools, profile elements, do profile by slope from element. I'm going to set my slope to 0, my vertical offset to 0. I'm going to pick on my first line. I'm going to reset, so right click. I'm going to project my curb back top to that element. I'm going to do it again. So select on that same line, reset. I'm going to profile or project the profile from my flow line to that. So now that this element has two profiles on it, I'm going to zoom out in my profile view. And we're going to see our two profiles. I'm still on curve back. We're going to draw a line because we want to transition from the top of curb down to our flow line. So I'm going to go to my vertical group, do my key point snap on the lines, profile line between points, snap to my line, snap to my other line, and then I'm going to set this as active. And there we're going to see, we're going to do that and repeat that process on all these lines. Our middle line, though, we're just going to profile from our flow line. I'm going to go ahead and open up this line, the profile model on it. Open in there, I'll do profile by slope at 0. On that line, right click to reset, I just want our profile from our flow line. That one's going to become active, and we'll see in our 3D because it only had the one profile on there. There's our profile lines now. Okay, we're going to go back and do our last one. You open up that profile. Come back. Vertical offset 0, slopes at 0. We're going to project our curve back top. That element. We're also going to project our flow line to that element. We have two profiles. And then we're going to draw on this time, we're going to go from our flow line back up to our curve. The line between points. Yeah. Do those, I'm going to set this. Oops, and there I didn't get a snap, so I want to make sure that I'm establishing those snaps, even the profile view, because that's what's going to develop that civil cell. And building those snaps and the rules, and I'm going to set this as active. So there we have our elements that we have that we're going to build that profile off of. So now that we have this element that we want to use, we're going to complex that together. So on here, I don't know what that transition is of that length, so maybe we want that to be 5 feet. On that length, we could put another control line in there. And control line in there to establish what we want those to be, or if we want to drag this out. We can adjust that to 6'7". We can build in that geometry. So maybe there's another geometry that we put into this control line. So we want that line to be out here. So we don't have to put the controls in there, those control handles, but it is nice to grab because we can turn those off. Because when we turn our constructions off, all we're going to see is the primary geometry of our that civil cell. Okay, so maybe on this, we want to build control lines into our civil cells. So we like that idea of the control lines. I'm going to come back and establish my construction lines yellow that I'm using for that. I'll do line from element, do by angle from element. Again, we're going to make this 90 and 90 and 1. I'm just going to put that line in there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. 90, 90, 1. Build that control in there. So of these, another tool that we can use is the civil AccuDraw or delta station offset. So on that one, I want this to be a certain distance from this intersection along this line or this element to control this line. We're going to reestablish that. So if I know what that distance is, and it doesn't really show from the details. So under general tools, we can come to our civil AccuDraw. Toggle that on. Your delta station offset holds up in your civil cells. Your stationing or station offset does not. This is really the only one, and this could be your best friend in civil cells. And I'll show you the little trick that I do. Is your delta station offset here. We're going to grab our handle that we put in. I'm going to switch it back to intersection step. I'm going to grab the handle. And with that delta station favorite, I'm going to hit O for origin. I'm going to select my curve back top as my reference. And then I want to do my intersection snap. And I'm going to do the intersection of my curve back top and my sidewalk front. So I'm going to establish that as a reference point. And then I can put this at, say it's 60. From that point in a 0% offset. So that'll allow me to establish what that distance is. Maybe it's 8 feet if I put in there. So that's going to put this point at that certain delta station. Maybe that's outside of my line. And if I hit escape, I can escape that. So this is always going to be that distance. So maybe I want that to be 7. Now I've built in a handle that's at certain distance along that curve back top. And I can grab this and grab my handle and I can snap to that intersection. Maybe. All right, so I'm going to reestablish where I want that to be controlled to. So since that was a single offset partial line there, I needed to grab the inside and snap. And we'll saw that when I make that adjustment, that profile is going to get longer because I snap to those ends of those lines as well. So that your profile is ruled to your 2D elements. I have this rule if I want to make that, say, 5 feet. Or if I want to make that 6 feet. My horizontal and my vertical are adjusting as I make those different adjustments in there to those elements. So I can have that control to build that in there as well. All right, we can do the same thing on this side. Maybe it's a certain distance along this curve back that we're tying there. So we have this. We're going to turn back on our civil AccuDraw. I'll hit O. Select my reference. Let's select my reference point. Maybe I want this to be 60 or -6 in that space. So -6. So it's going along that, or maybe it's -7. I don't want to put that in there. So then I have that. I'm going to do the same thing. I can change, turn off solo AccuDraw, and grab this line now. And this one, since it's a start, I need to grab this arrow, and I'm going to snap to that intersection. So now I have the controls built in. If I want to make the adjustments here, -8, that's going to reestablish on there. So I'm building in the control of how I want that to rule. I'm done with civil AccuDraw, but Delta Station's a cool tool that you can use to build in rules to your that civil stuff. That off. Maybe this is, let's say, 4. Right, so we have our main lines that are ruled there. We have that. Now we want to complex this together. And we want to put in here. We also want to draw in more our sidewalk lines to tie into those as well. This is kind of the issue. So it's not quite the standard that we have here, but we're building in those controls. So maybe there's a transition for our sidewalk that's going to the curb that we have in there. So we're building in that control that we may have or may need on our different elements that we have. So I'm going to go back to my feature definition toolbar. I'm going to match my curb front or sidewalk fronts. And I'm going to do just a line between points, do my intersection snap, or even the key point snap. I'm going to snap to this line for my start, and then I'm going to snap to that line. So maybe that's our boundary of our terrain model that we're going to put in. I'm going to do the same thing, match my back sidewalk, do my line. I'm going to snap to this line and snap to that line. Right, so say this is one of those different ways, or the civil cell that we want to build, or that standard. So we're building in the rules to all this geometry that we have. We can adjust these by doing, maybe it's -10, and kind of build that out. Everything's going to rule with it. Now we just need to build a vertical on these tools. So we have our 2D geometry that we have. Now we can build them there. So let's finish out our curve back. We have profiles on there. We're going to complex this together. I'm going to go back up to my feature definition toolbar here. We're going to match our curve back top. We're going to do horizontal, and we're going to complex by element. We're going to do manual. Maybe this is my back curve, and this is a, maybe we want template control that we put on it. I can't spell. When we complex this together, since we're using that manual, we're going to select each element. We want to make sure that arrow is going in the same direction. We're going to grab all the elements. And that arrow will change based on if you get past the midpoint. We want to make sure that's all in the same elements there. And then do one more left click, and then I'm going to right click to establish that. So there I've just complex this one element. Anything we do in the 2D, we need to select the profile view on that. And we're going to have to do that in the profile view as well. And there's the active profile. So there's where we're going to apply the linear template to. So we need to complex these elements. So it's all one profile. So we'll go to our vertical group of tools here. We're going to go complex geometry, complex, or profile complex by element. Maybe this is we give it the proper name, and consistent naming when you're building the civil cells is going to become important too. Maybe we want that to be our back curb gutter profile, and we're going to establish that profile and build that out. Now that we have that, I'm going to come in, and that's going to be my profile on that element. Since we're going to run a linear template on this, I'm going to come back to my 2D view. I'm going to go to properties. I'm going to change my linear stroking. I'm going to set that to, let's say, 1, or even if we want 0.5. So that's going to adjust that template drop as we place it over that. All right, so we have our linear template, our element for the linear template. Now we need to establish some profiles on our sidewalk. But we also need one profile off of this line to tie back to this for our ramp. So we're going to take our sidewalk. I'm going to match my feature. I'm going to do a single offset entire element. I'm going to toggle off. My offset. I'm going to snap to that to establish the offset. I don't want that in there. So from this line, I'm going to pick that beginning. I don't want to do it. So without putting that offset on, whatever this offset is going to be, we set that back to -7. That's going to roll off of there. What we want. So let's set that back to -10. On that one, let me rethink that. That's always going to stay there. So there we want to do a line between points. Let's snap to that line and then do my perpendicular snap to that. So since that's always going to stay there based off of this lower point, the curve point that we have here, I just did a line between points and snap to our front sidewalk. And then I always want to keep it perpendicular off of my sidewalk back. So I switch those two snaps. And then from here, I can build in my ramp off of that one. I'll set that to 2 feet. All right, because that's going to allow me to adjust this. Oops. Control. Everything else is going to say that's going to control the ramp width. So if I set that back to 10, everything else is going to stay there. Originally, I had it off of this one, but if that moves, it's going to move that distance. I'd have to come back and fix that. So now that we have everything for our sidewalks, we're going to come in and grab this line. I'm going to open up a profile view on this. And we're going to start building our outline of our sidewalk that we're going to put in for or build that terrain model for and build off the surface I put on. So on this line, we're going to go and do a project profile intersection point. So we know on this line, we want it to tie into our sidewalks. And then from our sidewalk, we're going to transition down to that. So we're going to build those profiles in there. And then for the ramp down to this, we're going to project that to our 12-to-4. But on this one, we're going to build our profile first. We're going to tie that into our existing slopes of our sidewalk. I want to do our profile creation, profile intersection point. I'm going to select our alignment, and then I'm going to hover over our front sidewalk, our reference line, and our back sidewalk. And that's going to develop our profile and give us those profile points here. So from this one, we're going to go to our origin snap. I'm going to do a profile line between points. And in that profile line between, I'm going to pick my profile view. And in the profile view, a trick in here is I don't want to do my tentative snap. So I don't want to come in and do that, my mouse button. I want the software to do it. So I'm just going to get close to that origin of that point. And then snap. And I'm going to do the same thing on there. So I don't want to do a hard snap from my mouse. I want this to establish when I put that in there. If I do a hard click, I might snap to the end of that line. And then when I place the civil cell, the rules there, it's just remembering it might have or create a jagged on there. So when you're establishing your profile intersection snap, let the software snap to your intersection points. Don't do a hard snap to those. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
And then I'm going to set this as active. And there we'll see our cross section there for the profile. We're going to do the same thing on this line. So back to our profile view. Do our profile intersection. We're going to select that to profile. We want it to cross this intersection and our profile of our curvature. And then we'll come back to our profile line between points. Our steps. Fill those in. This line up here. So it's just going to same tool that we're going to come in and reestablish those points on there. Profile intersection on this line. We want to grab sidewalk and our curb. Come back to our line between points. Set that as active. Back and do this line. That's right. And here, and there, like that. So define let's see, that's where it's- I don't know. From this line to there. Um, what we need to do, try to think through this if we have. So we're going to do our profile by slope. And we need to establish, do 1 divided by 12. We'll profile this line off of this line. So if it's a 1 or 12 to 1 or 1 to 12 ratio, is that that slope? That would be an 8.33. Sometimes you get this one confused.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
So we can just come in and that's going to be the same thing. So profile. This line. So then on these guys, I need to come back and establish this. Right, so I'll come back and do my profile. I forget my profile. It's not. I said that's higher. Let's see, right, where did I do wrong on that one?
Hey Todd, I think the line that you have to the left, that would be, because you have your pink line down there pointing referencing the two profiles, but in reality that point from the right to the left, you would want to that line be the 8%. So in reality, that line, it's going to be a little bit above existing ground, or maybe below.
Yeah.
And then you would have because if you're just tying to existing, you're not going to get that. Although it can be maximum 1 to 12 or 8.3% or less. If it is flatter than that, then that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. 8.3. Oh. Because you're going off the curve, that's going to be down to flow line. And from here down to that's the 2%. What am I? So this is the that's it. So you got negative, right? Because this is going to tie into existing or what's there off the sidewalk that this is establishing. From here, I'm going to place the curve down to the flow line. So on this, and that's the nice thing about placing the rules in here is on this geometry of the sidewalk, we can come to the properties and that's where we would adjust that slope. So I had a positive slope going up from that sidewalk. So I just need to reestablish that on the other side as well. So this was positive 8.3. I need to make it negative since it's running from here. And the same thing on this one is if I look at that, that's a positive, so it's going to go up. So if I make that negative, that's going to put that down. So your elements that we're putting in there for the sidewalk, that's the nice thing, is we have that ability to control that information on there. So the tying into existing is going to be built off of our sidewalk lines. There we have our 2%. That's going to give this element. From here, we're going to go down to our negative 1 to 2, or have that ability to change that out if we need to by grabbing the elements and changing these. We've established it on this side. We need to come here and now that kind of went down and then up. So I need to look at that point there. It might come back up. But then if we look at this line, just to kind of get this built on there, if we do our profile intersections of these, we'll establish that little different line and kind of build that out. So there we can establish another profile on there to tie that in and kind of build those out. So from this point, we're going to tie into those and build that out. Still have to come back through and change that. So another trick is do the profile complex by PI, but don't set anything for your curve. And then we can come in and snap to a line. If we set this as active, That's going to come in and change that. So maybe that's that line. So so maybe on this one, we want, instead of tying down, we want to tie that intersection point. Reestablish. So now if we set that as active, that's going to be that. All right, so we can come in and look at those, and that's kind of the nice thing about civil cells as well, is we can establish what those lines are. We can always come in and make modifications to those profiles. But when we do that, we don't want to just remove that profile or delete that profile. We want to draw in a temporary construction element and then set that as active. And then we can come in and reestablish snaps and build the profile that we actually want on those elements. And right, so now that we have everything kind of laid in here, let's go back and do our quick test. Do our name, references, everything's highlighting, so everything is good. Our horizontal is holding, our vertical is holding as well. Switch to our top view. Right, so we have our geometry that we need in here. We can come in and see. Now it's time to apply linear templates and surface templates. Or we need to create a terrain model of the sidewalk and then apply a linear template to that curved back top. So if we create our terrain model, we're going to go from elements. This is going to be a boundary. This will be a finish. We're going to go propose. We'll go BTM propose. Maybe this is our sidewalk. I'm going to do a boundary, so I'm going to grab my boundary element. That's all my boundary elements. Everything else is going to be break lines. I'm going to right click reset, left click to run through. That's going to create that. I'm going to add break line elements to my terrain model. I'm going to select on that. I'm going to go break. I'm going to select all the elements that I want to add. They need to have profiles on them as well. And then right click and then left click. And that's going to change how that terrain model interacts with those break lines. So if we look at this now, we have our terrain model that's ruled to our geometry. It has horizontal and vertical. We can rotate. So we have our terrain model that's going to come in. We're going to apply a template to our line. Then we'll give this a surface template. We'll go back to model detailing. We'll go surface template. We're going to apply a surface template. Since we already have our geometry drawn, we're not going to we're going to use the feature definition of disable linear features, so it's not going to draw those points in. We're going to pick a template and see what we have in here. So surface templates. There's our sidewalk. I'm going to apply that surface template. Go ahead and select our terrain model. We're going to left click through. And there it will give our depth for that curb ramp. We'll have in there. And then we'll look at our linear templates. Pick our template here. To linear template common. So we might have to build one. Let's take a look at that first. So let's go to corridor. So before we apply that linear template, let's go to our template library. So what we're going to have to do in this, we're going to go to Tools, Library Organizer, go to our main F.1, so look at C drive around 2024, Nation F. Dot, template here, and open that guy up. Burden better. Joel, is it type A, type F? Is it common one?
That would be type F, yep.
Let's grab that type F. Everybody's familiar with the library template organizer, so I'm just bringing that in. I'm going to save. And our third type F. Uh, So I'm going to change the template ordinance because we're placing it from back here. We have our curve line. I should have thought about that. So maybe we should have had for edge of pavement. You can come in there and play with that. And then maybe use this as a curve. So let's place it doing this and see what it does. We may have to establish if that's what we want. A curve. So I changed on the point, I changed the template origin to the curve back out. I'm going to close and save that. Close. And then let's apply our linear template. Grab that. And we'll lock it to the start, lock it to the end, and select it how we need to, and then place that. So on that one, we probably would have to build All right, let me think about that. We wouldn't want the whole thing. We just want to have that be a point control. Off the edge of pavement on the back one. All of that. So that's one way we could do it, by just establishing that. Maybe we build a different linear template to be put into there. And maybe we don't have, maybe it's just that curb. We don't have that entire type F. But if we look at that, that's really, everything. We have it modeled. We have built that. One thing that we do want to check is in our 3D view, because I'm going to come in and look at my levels. I don't want to see default. I'll turn that off. Silent PX. Search. Hot mesh. We got to turn our RTXs off. Right, so I'm just turning that geometry off. Before we make the civil cell is on our mesh components here. There's item types established in your workspace. So what we need to do is we need to remove those in this civil cell because they're not going to hold up. We're not going to create that civil cell. If we try to create it, since they have item types on it, how the structure of the civil cell is set up, it doesn't allow for item types. That's a bug. We've asked about it. Hopefully they're working on it to allow those item types on there. But as a workaround right now, is we need to select everything in our 3D view of our mesh components. We're going to go to utilities and we're going to detach all those item types that we have on there. So we have curb and gutter and then the sidewalk detectable warnings. We want to detach those. And then I'm just going to verify. What I usually do is I'll select it twice. And then make sure I don't have anything in there and detach them. So now that those are detached, I can create that civil cell and place it over and over again. It's going to read from the original features. So if I do place it, it's going to have those item types attached onto it. Just when we create the civil cell, we're not going to be able to build it with item types on. So we have to remove those. All right, so we have that civil cell in here. We have everything following that line. So now that we have this established, we're going to come back and create our civil cell. And this is where we would probably be more specific on the name. So I'm just going to name this our demo curb ramp. Whenever we name it, I'm going to hit tab to get to the next portion of that dialog. And then I'm going to do a left click and space. And then I'm going to locate my references. So here we can locate the reference. And maybe this is, we'll just say ref. And this will be our curb flow line. Say that is profiled. So we know it's going to be a 3D cell. After we hit name it, we're going to hit tab to lock at that name. Then we can go select the reference element. We're going to come back to our dialog. And we'll set this is ref. And maybe this is our curb back top. That's going to be profiled. I just got click happy, so we're going to come in here and do a spec base, and this will be our ref. Here back top. And we'll say that's profiled as well. We're going to hit tab again. So anytime we name the reference, we're going to hit tab to lock that name in. Then we can go select the reference. You can see that everything's highlighting. Come back and we're going to name it one more time. So this is our sidewalk. Sidewalk front. Profiled. Anytime I'm creating a 3D, if I try to establish in those references what that item is, and also if it's profiled or not. We may have a combination of profiled elements or non-profiled elements to create our civil cell. And then our last name, sidewalk. Go our back. And that will be profiled as well. All right, so it's going to grab everything. We should see the 3D mesh components get as well. Once we have everything selected, we're going to do a right click. We don't have optional references. We're going to right click and then we'll left click, and that's going to create our civil cell. So now that we have that civil cell created, that's in a group for the civil cell. We're going to go to our Explorer. And under our Open Roads Model tab, we're going to go to our file that we're in. Design, we'll go to Civil Cells. There's our demo curb ramp. There it's going to highlight. We'll check our references. So there's our 4 references. We can check the names. If we come in and select on those, it'll highlight the reference themselves. Everything within the civil cell is going to be in the dependent elements. Before we get to that dependent elements, another thing that'll come is I'll select on the name and then right click on it. If we see this as place civil cell under that general category, or if we go to the properties of it, this is going to be valid for placement. So as you create civil cells, if I look at my properties dialog, now I have our demo curb ramp open. I want to expand that out. I want to make sure that this valid for placement is set to yes. So I can place this civil cell when I establish those different references. So it says it's going to place it. Its valid for placement is yes. So in the DGN Live within your workspace, every civil cell in there is valid for placement. After we place it, it's not going to be valid. So we'd have to drop it and reestablish that. So if that ever goes bad, if we update our surface template, update that linear template, it's going to say that this is not valid for placement. What we would have to do then is right click, drop that civil cell, and basically recreate that civil cell with running through those references again. So you can check your properties, make sure you're under general category, your valid for placement is set to yes. You can also right click and see that we can place here. If it was not valid, that would be grayed out. That we would place that in there. If we look at our dependent elements, that's all the elements that are building that civil cell. We'll see our profiled elements. We want to make sure that we have our sidewalk, our terrain model, our linear templates here, every element that we have in there. On the terrain model, we're going to select on that and right click. And we're going to add that as a clipping boundary. So within the civil cell itself isn't going to clip to the corridor or be a clipping element, but the terrain model that's built that we're using is going to be our clipping. We're going to add that terrain model as clipping. When we do that, it's going to allow us to clip out that entire civil cell out to the clip. Okay, so there we have our civil cell that we placed. We built. We took our corridors off. We added as clipping element. We looked at some of the different tools to build that. We looked at the rules. So it's really just geometry and rules that are going to establish that element. So we have our curve flow line, curve back, curve goes. So that's really kind of building that, the geometry that we place in. So let's see. So on this particular, if it's a curb ramp, kind of with the arcs, I would almost recommend, or I would probably recommend that you have a left and a right of these, just to make it easier to place. Just with the geometry and the rules that we have built into this one, this would make sense to have a right, even though we built the left. So this is only going to place on the left-hand side that we put that in there. So let's see if we can come in and place that. So let's go. So this is our BSGR 2D. Let's browse. Let's look at our model 64. But any questions on just building the civil cell itself? Ideally, we're going to come in and test that to place to see if it'll hold up. You guys still out there? Did any of that not make sense in the rules or the practices?
I have no questions. For the linear template for that curve that was set in, what we've done in the past to model, we use parametric constraints to transition those points on the type F curve to essentially a drop curve. So I was thinking that for that we created, that could be done, I guess, to model that transition.
You could do that, yeah. Let's see. Parametrics, I've had mixed. Feelings on that. Sometimes they hold up, sometimes they don't, because they're not relative to a stationing. And that could change. A point control might be better in that situation to establish that. And just gonna bring over this. So if you guys do go to Flood, there are like lessons learned, because each time that you build a civil cell, if you're going to get into building civil cell, you're going to learn best practices, lessons learned of what you're going to build to make it easier and faster. Parametrics, you could do that maybe afterwards. I've had them work and not work. I've had them kind of break. But that is valid. You could do parametrics. You could also do a point control and establish that as well. But in that, the guide that I sent to you as well, at the very end of that is you will have, your lessons learned that we put in there and best practices or considerations. Really, it's not best practices, it's just what we're learning as we build that civil cell. And this is just kind of some of them. So, turn that 3D off, negative coordinates, test from that first element that you put into as your rules, as you're building that geometry, building those referencing rules. You want to test, just to make sure that it's giving everything that you need in there. Because it's nothing worse than going in and thinking it's great, and then going to place it, and you have a terrain model that's shooting down to 0 or up to 5,000, right? Then you got to go back and look, try to reestablish where those rules are, those snaps. Most of the time, it's just missing that snap in there. But parametrics, you could do that. I would almost recommend a point control as well. We did the station offset, so these are just some different best practices that we have. You're going to establish that as you build them to yourselves and lesson learned. So they're best practices, but it's really just kind of a work in progress of best practice. We're finding out what works, what doesn't work in the different civil cells that we're building. Your snaps, so key point, intersection, your mid origin, and perpendicular all work well. Origin snap, intersection snap are the best. Our delta station offset within civil AccuDraw, that holds up pretty good. Parametrics will hold up, but if you're putting that in, I would build kind of what we did. So that kind of build in your elements that you can snap to establish. You may have to reestablish those after the fact. If you're familiar with, your parametrics or even a point control, it's easy to get them in there. What else we got? Target aliasing and clipping can be performed afterwards. So if we want to do target aliasing, we do clipping. The terrain model will have that clipping ability, but maybe you want to turn some of that stuff, information off as you kind of build that in there. So different things you're going to learn. I would recommend going to the different courses and building the civil cells. A lot of it is just getting in there and building, learning the rules and the references as you place in there. So there's different tips and tricks that you'll probably learn yourself, that you can pass on to your other colleagues as well. But those are just some of them that we've ran across as we build these different civil cells. So let's test this out in see what civil cell. So I'm going to see if we have a drive civil cell or 3D. Um, Let's just go back to our place file. So if we go here and then just let's see, what's going on and open and with the trying to see what template that we can throw in there. What F is this the only FEM that has sidewalk on it? Joel, or reach out to see if there I just missed that.
What was the question? Sorry.
Just trying to build a quick model that we can place that
Sidewalk.
sidewalk on.
Mm,
Doing FEM exhibit that had or do we
go for examples for training. Yeah, maybe there.
is there an urban?
There's gotta be. There's one for sure with sidewalk. Let me check. Curve.
Hey, that's pretty. Oh, So it's that close. So there, just quickly built one. So let's see how good my skills are on the fly. So let's see. So really, what we want to do is One more in there. Oh, what did I do now? Do the path. Let's just do this. What was I thinking? Let's do geometry. Right between points. Center radius. We're going to model that curve return there. And then for the first and then copy. Then let's come in and geometry profile. This guy 15. So active profile. So now do a corridor. I'm gonna do half of it. I'll set that. Right, so now that we have that geometry in there, right, so we need our flow line, curb back, our sidewalk front, sidewalk back. We have our civil cell, so we can come in here and we're going to right click in place. We need that geometry that's not drawing. So let's go to standards. So linear roadway design, template points. We want curve flow to show our sidewalk line. Curve back to show. So I don't have my 2D geometry, so I'm turning that on to show. So now if I come to that feature definition, I'm going to reestablish that. I want to be able to pick those lines from my 2D model. I'm going to reprocess that corridor. And there's my curve lines. So there's my flow line, there's my curve back, sidewalk front, sidewalk back again, right? We're on a curve. So now, see the moment of truth. We come in here and place that civil cell. So we're going to locate our curb flow, our curb back top, our sidewalk front, sidewalk back. So we may have to adjust those reference lines of how they're drawn into that geometry. That's not gonna help. Because that sidewalk is on a curve. As well, so need to establish sidewalks. So that needs to be coming perpendicular to that. Those ones. Oh. So let me turn off my sidewalk lines there. Think about that for a second. Let's do this. So let's put these two lines. That's what happens when you try to do your sometimes. So I want this. I want this line. So there I have my lines. So I didn't think about that. Is this your sidewalk lines are being straight to come into that, but that's going to curve. So we have those. So let's come in and place. So our curve is going to be the flow line, our curve back, the sidewalk front, sidewalk back. That's more better. So we'll get the preview of those lines. And then the reference lines are just that. They're just that. They're just references to place that into that geometry. If we need to adjust or change the direction of those lines, everything inside that civil cell is tied to those reference lines that we have placed in there. So I don't have alternatives. That's just switching the direction of my reference lines. If everything lines up as it did here, it looks good. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to clip to my corridor. I'm going to select on that and then right click reset and then left click to place that civil cell. And it's going to run in and place that civil cell. I just need to come in and make those couple of corrections on there. So there's a couple points that are different between the civil cell and the curb ramp. Maybe the width of the curb ramp is why that's not doing that, but that's part of the testing as we come in and place that geometry in there. And it clipped it out. So if I look through that, if I look at my references, I can make those adjustments. We'll have that heel. So that's part of that testing as we put that in there. So that's the references are going to help us place it. If I turn that level off or that DTM, or the DTXs, I would just have to look at that geometry within there. If we look at our cross section, so there's something with the curb that I have in here that both of these two curb ramps. If I look at the top view on there, the radiuses. So I might come in here, and since that was the corridor, and changing to tie that in there, but I want to make sure I use the same curves. That should kind of set that in there. I could remove that curve on there, but that's the curve from the civil cell should be replaced. The other civil cell coming in, but that's a quick test that you can do to place it as we're looking at that. I'm just going to put that out, and maybe that's where your parametric, like you were saying, Kevin, we might want to, instead of have that off of this, create our edge of pavement line, and then use this as a point control to put that down. Because if we look at this, this civil cell here, our edge of pavement is up above. So it's tying in nice here, but when we get into that, we have that edge of pavement. So maybe we have the edge of pavement line that we want to put that curb on, and then use a point control or parametric constraint to tie that down to do that, so that the linear template we probably have to look at and reestablish how we want that to rule. So we probably want to create in our civil cell that we ran through here is, instead of having the template off of this line, possibly running an edge of pavement line as a reference as well, adding a control element on that with 0, and then add this line as a control to do that. Because if we remember, I had just the first iteration of our civil cell here that we were playing around with, is I had to rebuild that template. So if we establish an edge of pavement line, that's going to be our profile line to place this. And then our yellow line, we're going to use that as a point control. So what I would do here is, if I drop a civil cell, delete that profile, because we built our transition into that. So if I come in here off of, we got our flow line, 6 inches. So if I build a control line or a center line with our single offset partial, and I want that to be, say, 2 foot. If we're keeping the same references, I'm going to go 2 foot from our intersection and our intersection. I'm going to put this to the opposite side. I want that to be 2. It's this 5. That's 105. Look at that. Yeah. And change that back for flow line, vertical 0.1. 3. Change, and then on this one, flow line 105. So let's just do this real quick. Profile by slope 2%, 0.13. So it's kind of backwards. I would probably start with my edge of pavement as use that as a reference and then for flow line for back top. And then I could project the slope off of this if that's constant down to 0.13. I'm just doing it backwards from flow line back to here. And then on this one, I do want to set that stroking to 1. And now I can do my linear template for type F off of this line. Snap to the start, snap to the end. Fuck that. That. If that's going to draw my lines, but now I look at my template, I can do a point control. That's going to lock to start, stop. My point, I want that to be my curve back out. I'm going to control that vertically. Let's see. So, sorry. I'm going to open up my profile of that line. So on the control line that we did, the back of curve that we built, the transition, I'm going to use that as a point control to control the back of this curve based off of that edge of pavement. That's going to have it tie it back into those. So now I'm going to do my create point control. I'll locate my corridor, lock it to start, lock it to end. So this is my curve back top. And this is my point control. So I can spell. So just another way to create that. So then I want to locate my point. I can pick that from my 3D, or I can pick from the list. So I want that to be my curve back out. I'm going to control it vertically. And linear geometry, I'm going to pick in my profile view. Set that to a priority 1. And that will establish that. I'd have to kind of build, that geometry there. Where that would be another way to build that out. But I want to make sure that I have everything in there controlled. The other way to do that is, I think Kevin, you were saying too, is we could establish a parametric off those points. The only thing on the parametric though, it wouldn't tie into that or keep those rules. The point control would keep the rules a little bit better. We would just have to look at that that template that we put in there. So it looks like at 2 foot. Lines, so I think that should be 1 foot 4. And that's going to put it in. So I had the flow line that the 2 foot was wrong, so I moved that to 1 foot 4. This point is we would just have to look at the rules within that template. how this is off of. So that why that's not coming down is because it's ruled off of this curve TP and the curve flow out. The curve flows out. We can just change this one's okay, but maybe this one we want to change that to the curve back top with 5, and that's going to be recursive. So we'd have to think about those rules and reestablish those of how that's built. So we may have to relook at that curve on there. But we could do a point control. What I'm trying to do is get it to rule off of this one. So these 2 points come down with that. So that's going to do a recursive. And that's vertically off. Second trait can't be placed in that. I'll have to look at this point. And this is just some of the stuff that you have to do. That's because this one is from that point. So that's causing the recursive. So horizontally from this is 2 foot out. This one I could reestablish hopefully here. Plus constraints. Add this constraint. Save that. So if we change this point control, since this point is ruled off of that, if I test that vertically, I want that to go down as it follows that point. So we're applying the point control to the curve back out to have it follow. The curve face out is ruled to that, so it's going to follow that. Kind of the same thing with parametric constraint or that label. Is if we have these two, we could add a vertical constraint in there to do that. But that's just one way to kind of get that. So if I close that and then reprocess template. So I just reestablished that. I could rebuild that in there. And that's another way. Point control will hold up a little bit better. It would be the same process of just building that back in there. So I could reestablish what I want to show in that, or just rebuild the civil cell with that point control built in. So now if I look at my corridor objects, there's parametrics. I can have those in there. Sometimes those stations don't hold up. So I'm a little hesitant. I've had it in there. You would just have to re-establish snaps along your controls, but that could change depending on different things that you have. But the point control, that's going to be locked to that control. You control it horizontally, vertically, or both in that geometry. that'll hold up better in the civil cell, in both linear templates and corridor templates. So at this point, you could just reestablish that and place it again, and then you could pick that edge pavement line. Within there. So if I come over here, delete our civil cell that we placed, we'll come back here on 3A and demo curb ramp. Just for time, will be flow line, hit tab. So this will be our first curb back top, hit tab. We are front sidewalk, tab. So we are back sidewalk. And everything in there, right click, left click. Back to my civil cell. Make my references, come back to add that as clipping. Back over here. We have our reference elements in there. We have everything set up. Come up here and right click in place. Pick our flow line, back, sidewalk front, sidewalk back. Take a preview, right click. I want to flip it to a corridor, right click reset, left click to place it. And there, it's going to come in and then place that on there. So that might be a better way to establish the edge of pavement or that control line. But now if I place this in there, if I look at the model, everything it's clipping out based off the civil cell. If I go to my cross section that we'll see, look at those and then select the corridor. Right, so there we're at the start. We can walk through. And as we're transitioning, we can look at that civil cell. We turn our levels off. With those, we're going to see that in there. And if we look as we kind of walk through that, that's going to help us transition up to full curve, down into that 80 degree ramp. If we need to make any of those changes, we can look at that civil cell there. Since we did place it, it's reading back to the feature definition, even though we removed it. I right click, those item types are on that civil cell I replaced it. I can just come in here and maybe that's our 6-inch sidewalk. There's a curb that has that on there. So it's temporarily we remove it as we build the civil cell, but as we place it, it's going to place it reading back to those feature definitions that we can see. All right. Well, I think that's all I've got for you. I know that was probably a lot, but that's kind of a quick course. In civil cells, it's really the rules and the snaps and just looking at the templates that you want to apply, looking at your standards that you want to build it from, kind of getting in there and investigating that standard dissecting it, what would be the best place to, or best way to place it. It's different simple cell, building your references off that. So maybe a flow line, curb back top, sidewalk front, sidewalk back. We can build the curbs in there. So different ways we can build those different civil cells in there, and have a left or right look at, looking at the different ways to build that out. Some are going to be easier than others, but it's all the same geometry. The tools are the same. It's just how you get that. So just think of it as geometry that you're going to build. But you want to build it so you can replace it over and over again to that certain standard, and then have it be able to adjust to your design criteria after you place that using your references. I think that's all I got. I know that was probably a lot of information for you guys. Hopefully that helps. You do have the recording. I guess Chris and Matt or Joel, you guys have anything else?
No,
This was
nothing
good.
to add.
Thank you, Todd.
Anytime.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Civil cells can be fun, but you can pull your hair out with them too, especially when the rules or snaps don't hold up. But it is good. Get a good idea to get other eyes on them too. Here to help you guys if you need to with your civil cells and that geometry.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I
Thank
think
you.
we'll follow up in a couple weeks too. If there are something that you have or that you need, the follow up is that a week, Joel, or
Yeah, a week.
a week? Okay.
Yep, next week I think it is.
Awesome.
Mhm.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep. No
Alrighty,
problem.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you,
Take care.
everyone.